You know, it was my lifelong dream to be an IndyCar driver.
I mean, Greg, he was my hero, and heroes don't die.
Nothing is no risk. You just don't know.
You know, people say this when people die, but he really was a special person.
I was doing this for Greg. It was just surreal. I mean, I believed all along that I had help on those laps.
It was a wonderful gesture, it really was, and I think it spoke of his admiration for his hero, Greg. I thought it was just a wonderful, wonderful thing to do.
At 22 years old, we've said you're the youngest winner, and now a Canadian that wins, now so much on your shoulders. I mean, can it stop? I mean, where does this all end for you?
Let's hope it never stops. I just love this. This is beautiful. I love it.
It was only the beginning. Greg Moore was young, talented, a rising star in the world of open-wheel racing. As the 20th century drew to a close, the slight, bespectacled kid from Maple Ridge, BC, had rocketed through the ranks. In his last season in Indy Lights, he won 10 of 12 races. In his first 4 years of IndyCar, he won 5 times.
Could this be the day for Greg Moore and the players team from Canada? Moore thinks he hasn't won. With his fist in the air, he takes the checkered flag and resets the record as youngest winner of a PPG Kart World Series event.
It's our first win, and I'm so happy.
In a golden era for Canadian racing, Scott Goodyear, Paul Tracy, Jacques Villeneuve, Moore might have been the best of them.
He was the best that I have ever come against. And that was, yeah, I was in awe of what he could do. On an oval, the car control he had, I couldn't do it. I still can't do it.
He was fun, a practical joker, wildly popular in the garage and in the pits, with crew and competitors alike.
And look at Jimmy Vasser come over to give a thumbs up to Greg Moore.
He was at the center of a group of young drivers, including his best friend on the circuit, Dario Franchitti.
He really enjoyed life. I mean, he was the center of the kind of the party. He brought all the drivers together. He had this magnetic personality. You know, I'm a couple of years older, but we were kids, and in all sense of the word, we were kids. We were kids that were getting to live this great dream and you know, travel the world and do all this fun stuff, and it was great. It was the time. It was the time of my life, definitely.
Still trying to keep the old guy going. Well, at least I can still carry him.
Yeah, it didn't fall over.
No.
That was good.
My whole deal with Greg was to, if I could make him into a great person first and an IndyCar driver second, as long as he could always keep that in perspective. If you can make a mark professionally is great, but if you can make a mark personally, that's a lot better.
Yeah, he definitely was cocky. He always was, and that was part of his endearing part of him, you know. But he was a really caring guy, though. A really, just a great person, and I think Rick had a lot to do with that.
It's so nice and quiet. It's hard to believe, eh?
It's good. Water's cold, though.
Is it?
Yep.
Good cast.
Yeah, don't stand right behind me.
Your grandpa's taught you very well.
Yeah, he taught me how to catch. Didn't catch me how to catch, though.
Yeah, that's why they call it fishing and not catching.
Exactly.
Well, this is the lull before the storm for this weekend. So it's great you're able to get out here and have some time.
Moore's car was blue, the color of his sponsor. So were his helmet and his racing suit. But he insisted that his gloves had to be red, bright red, for a reason.
He was actually under some heat from his car owner and from players, his sponsor. And his answer to them was said, well, I'm driving a blue car with a blue helmet and a blue suit. When I stick my hand in the air, I want someone to see a red glove. You know, he was a proud Canadian. So that's where the red glove came from. And he did it all through his career. He wanted to make sure that it was there.
As the 1999 kart season drew to a close, Moore announced that he would be joining the powerful Penske racing team in 2000. It figured to be the final step on his way to the top of the sport, putting him in a car capable of winning every race. But before that could happen, there was still a season to complete. The last race of 1999 was the Marlboro 500 at the California Speedway in Fontana. It was Halloween.
I watched every race Greg had. It was his last race with Jerry. He was going to sign with Mr. Penske. Watching the race, and I think Richie Hearn spun and brought out the yellow. Spun, no big deal. Life goes on, race goes on. Next thing you know, the thing goes back. I hear someone said, you know, they told me later that Greg come on the thing, said, man, this is great, I'm having a great time. And he spun, almost the exact same spot as Richie Hearn. For some reason, the car turned sideways.
Oh! Oh, an enormous crash. Oh my God, a terrible crash.
Hit the wall, and that was it. Man, I knew that was it.
Now we send you down trackside.
I regret to announce that driver Greg Moore has been pronounced dead at Loma Linda Hospital. He died of massive head and internal injuries. He was pronounced dead at 21 minutes after 1 o'clock.
And I just started drinking. I called a priest I knew, and I'm not a religious guy, and asked him what to do. And he said he saw it, and he said you could pray, but it didn't make much difference. And after that, racing wasn't as much fun. It didn't mean as much. The guy before him did the same thing. Nothing happens to him. That's what I remember. That's just, at least he died doing something that he liked to do. "12 years later, still crying."
You know, people say this when people die, but he really was a special person, and anybody that met him or spent any time with him or knew him well will know what I'm talking about. Definitely a one-off, and just a great person.
Greg Moore was on the verge of stardom when a tragic racing accident ended his life on October 31st, 1999.
He had so much talent, so much potential, and you know, I don't think we really got to see what that potential, what that would have turned into.
The terrible news rocked the sport and sent the racing community and the country into mourning. For one family in Oakville, Ontario, it hit very close to home.
Greg, he was my hero, and heroes don't die. Heroes are always the guys that are at the end of the movie.
I sat with James watching the race. We saw the accident.
When the camera cut to this blue car spinning to the infield, I remember very distinctly jumping up and yelling, "Carpentier!" because I just didn't want Greg to be going out of the race.
We were absolutely horrified.
And I didn't get to see the end of the race. I think I left shortly after.
We had to fly to Charlotte because James was racing in a go-kart race.
I was young, and I didn't really think much about it. I'd never heard of a driver being killed before. It just didn't really register that was a possibility, I guess.
And it wasn't until late that evening when we arrived in our hotel and I called home, and Arlene was the one who told me that Greg had passed away.
As my mom, who's in tears on the phone, is telling me something, I read across the bottom of the Canadian racer Greg Moore killed in an accident today in Fontana, and I'm hearing my mom crying, I'm reading this, and it sort of took me a second to put it all together.
It had a huge impact, without a question. It was devastating for James.
Yeah, it was just shocking because, again, I didn't really register that was something that could happen. And as a young kid who aspired to do that very thing, to watch your hero, lose his life doing that was a very tough day.
James Hinchcliffe grew up as the son of a racing fan father, the only one of 3 kids in the family who really took to the sport.
I mean, I was at a young enough age that they could have very easily put a stop to my racing right then and there. And there really isn't anything a 12-year-old could have done about it.
He knew that he was going to be an IndyCar driver, and he was absolutely focused. There was no doubt in his mind that that's what he was going to do as a career.
I give them a lot of credit in leaving that decision up to me, because they did. We sat down and had a conversation about it. And it was never a decision. They didn't force me one way or another. They didn't try and influence it. They really let me do it on my own.
He cut his teeth racing go-karts. And every summer, Hinchcliffe came out to see the stars when the Indy circuit arrived in Toronto. At the age of 12, he brought his prize steering wheel to the race with hopes of meeting his idol.
The steering wheel was given to me by a gentleman who, as far as I knew at the time, he had actually bought Greg's very first race car. And the steering wheel that had come with it when he bought it was the one that Greg had used. They hadn't changed it the whole life of the car. And my goal was to get Greg to sign this thing. And so I brought it to the Toronto race in '99.
James had brought down his steering wheel, which he's so proud of. And of course, being your little brother, you want to make his dreams come true and make him smile. So I had noticed that there was an autograph session outside of Greg's trailer. And so I grabbed James and we grabbed the wheel and we went and we stood in line behind, I don't know if it must have been almost 200 people.
I could go through the entire 3 hours and 10 minutes I stood there and all the different things that happened, weather from 30 degrees to raining, we had everything in that 3 hours.
I could tell that Greg was getting ready to wrap it up and, it was getting to the last few and it was time to go, and I just tried to give him this pleading puppy dog look.
There was no one else around. And one of Greg's mechanics looked over and walked over to my sister and I, who was standing with me at the time, and said, "You guys have been here forever. Did you need something?" Or what, And so my sister actually explained the story of the steering wheel and this, that, and the other, and the mechanic just said, "This is the coolest thing I've ever heard, stay right here." And he walked into the trailer and he grabbed Greg and he pulled him out.
And he came over and James was the last one he signed. He grabbed the steering wheel, and so it was amazing, and James was just thrilled.
And so with no one else there, Greg came out and chatted to my sister and I for 10 minutes. And, I was just kind of, so thank God my sister was there, because she was asking the questions, and I, just an absolute awe, and got it signed. And, I'm so thankful that I stood around for as long as I did, because that was the last chance I had. That was '99.
Hinchcliffe's rise through the sport wasn't quite as meteoric as his heroes, but he was certainly regarded as a bright young talent. He debuted in IndyCar in 2011, and in 2012 won a seat with the powerful Andretti racing team.
Well, James is still developing. I think what I've seen this, last couple of years, he had the potential, but he hadn't quite crossed the finish line.
And on the inside, Hinchcliffe is on the over and under. Oh, he is in the mayor's office. James Hinchcliffe runs it to the line. Will he have enough? And he wins his second one. James Hinchcliffe is a winner again. How about that? And you can see how much that means to Hinchcliffe.
I think James has all the potential now. He really does have that potential to become, a great driver. Is he there yet? No, he isn't. He's too early in his career for that. But he's a guy you're going to have to look out for a lot, I think.
Dario's got a pretty good eye for people, and Dario and Greg were as close as two guys could be, I think, be it race car or friends or whatever it would be. So I think if Dario's hanging around, Dario's got that to say, I would have every confidence in him. So I think it'd be nice to see another Canadian come up, and hopefully James can be the guy.
Still to come, James Hinchcliffe pays the ultimate tribute to his racing hero at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Indianapolis is kind of is the holy grail for anybody that races.
Greg never got to race the Indy 500. And everybody knows that Greg was an oval master. And it's like sacrilegious to think that a guy as talented as him never got the chance to race here.
Oh, it meant the world to him.
Greg Moore's years at the top coincided with the kart Indy split, when the best drivers in the sport were denied the chance to race at the historic speedway. It is one of the sad ironies of his death that Helio Castroneves took what would have been his place with Penske. The Penske team returned to Indianapolis in 2001. Castroneves won that year, and again in 2002, and again in 2009. A lot of people in racing believe it could have been, and should have been, Greg Moore drinking milk in that winner's circle.
When you see what Helio did, and I think Helio's a pretty good driver, but on an oval, in my opinion, Greg's the best I ever saw. So him in that car in that situation with those opportunities, you never know what would happen, but he would have been very, very, very tough to beat.
Steve Brodie, just plain Brodie to everyone who knows him, is a mechanic and a character around the track. He worked with Greg Moore on the Indy Lights circuit and formed a bond both with Greg and Greg's father, Rick. One of the legacies of that friendship was a very special souvenir.
Greg gave me those gloves. I want to say it was Milwaukee. We always had a good run at Milwaukee. And we had won the race, and he was signing stuff. And I said, hey, Greg, give me a set of gloves. So he signed them and handed to me there. So I've had those gloves since then. I was just watching Wind Tunnel with Dave Despain, and the Hench was on, and I'd watched Hench drive, and I thought, yeah, he's pretty cool, Seems like a fun guy. And so Dave says to Hench, so I hear you're a big Greg Moore fan. And then Hench says, oh, yeah, I got this and I got that. And he always wears red gloves, and I drive with red gloves, and I'm thinking, oh, hell, I got red gloves in my garage. I says, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could get these things to Hench and he could take Greg for a ride around the track?
I was approached by a guy who comes up to me and he introduces himself as someone who used to work on Greg's team.
And I says, hey, Hench. And he looks at me like, who are you? What do you want? And
he goes, I understand you're a big Greg Moore fan. I said, yeah, kinda.
I says, can you do me a favor? He looks at me like, I guess. And I says, well, I'm a big Greg Moore fan. I know you're a Greg Moore fan. I says, I've got these gloves that Greg signed, and I'd be wanting to know if you would take Greg for a ride around the track.
And I was floored. I was absolutely floored to think that somebody that worked with him and knew him, as well as Brodie did, to come to me and ask me to do this.
I says, you don't have to wear them or just practice round. I'm sure Greg would have loved to drive this track. And if you would do that for me, I'd appreciate it.
I understood and saw how big a deal that was to give Greg his first laps around here.
I said, yeah, it'd be cool if it happens. I don't know if it's going to happen, but it'd be really cool. He said he'd do it. And that was pretty much, that was it. I didn't see Hench again.
The gloves showed up during practice week, and I had them all week, and I was trying to decide when I was gonna take them for a few laps. And so I decided a couple practice laps isn't enough. That's not good enough. And I saved it for my first qualifying attempt. And I had them with me in my helmet bag, and we're lined up. And I put on my helmet, my Hans device. All I've got to do left is put on my gloves, and I just sort of quietly grab them and I slipped them into my suit. I did my suit up, and I had them right here. And I got in my car, and we went and did our 4 flying laps together.
I can't believe it. I'm shaking. Hench is going to be, first lap, he's fast. I'm going, come on, Greg. Come on, Greg. Come on, Hench. Come on, Greg. Come on, Hench. I'm going crazy. I'm getting goosebumps, and I'm starting to cry again, as you tell. And unbelievable.
And it was P1, and it put us on top for the session, for the day.
And then he goes for this interview, And the announcer, I don't know, remember who it was, and he says,
"Help from a friend. Tell us about that." Yep, Bob talked about this.
Greg Moore never got to do laps at Indy, so we just qualified with him.
That's great. Good luck.
And I burst into tears. I could not believe it. There they were. Greg puts it on pole. Not Hench, Greg. Greg puts it on pole. Greg is there. A dream comes true for me that he got to be there for that deal.
I was doing this for Brody, for Greg, and for me. It was just surreal. And I mean, I believed all along that I had help on those laps.
I was watching it on TV, and I saw when he pulled the gloves out, and went, what the hell's going on? And it was like, I had a lump in my throat. And that, to me, shows the personality, not the personality, shows the character of James, I think. And that, I mean, I already liked him a lot, but that just, I thought, yeah, good man. That really, that meant a lot for him to do that.
One of the fears we had when we lost Greg was people would maybe forget about him, which obviously hasn't turned out to be the situation. And it's nice that he had made enough of an impression to give this guy the drive to get there.
It was a wonderful gesture, it really was, and I think it spoke of James's love of racing, but I think it spoke of his admiration for his hero Greg, and because Greg was my friend, and anybody I think who was Greg's friend or anybody who's Greg's fan, I think really gravitated towards James with that gesture. I thought it was just a wonderful, wonderful thing to do.